Welcome to this episode of the Not So Neutral Zone. I'm Jacob with David, and we're here to give you another good show today.
Well, I think the first thing we need to speak of is a while back we mentioned we were going to do some Hall of Fames once we got ourselves sorted out a little. So, one person who's eligible for 2 of our Hall of Fame list, I think we need to, I know it's starting to become a theme that we remember these people that pass away during the week, but the legend himself, Stroker Ace, or if you're a football fan of movies, the original Paul Crewe, and then he became Nate Scarborough, or as everybody likes to remember him, the Bandit, Bo Darville, is taking his Trans Am and playing lead blocker for the Snowman again. Burt Reynolds passed away this week, which both of us were too young to remember when Smokey and the Bandit first came out, so it became like a cult classic kind of thing for both of us. And I spent the last week trying to think of different movies I've seen Burt in that I liked. And aside from those, not much really stuck out to me other than Smokey and the Bandit, Stroker Ace, and the Long Starred movies. I don't know about you.
See, the last one I watched with him in it was The Hateful Eight, which I think he does a very good job in, but it is a Tarantino film, so it's, your mileage may vary. I know a lot of people probably won't like his character in that movie, but
And on that same token, I want to move into our next topic and keep Burt in the conversation. But Darlington was this past weekend, throwbacks, and it seems every year somebody is doing a throwback to some movie. Next year, I would like to see a Stroker Ace throwback. On one of the old NASCAR video games, I actually was racing through a season when they first started the throwbacks, and decided I was going to run my own Stroker Ace throwback car. I did the closest I could, looked up Google references and everything. Not so much. But I was going to ask you, since you watched it, what did you think of the finish with a actual legit throwback that actually looked exactly like the car, colors and everything, not just a replica of the design winning the race?
I mean, it was definitely a trip because, a lot of these were back in the same time period I started watching racing. I didn't watch it religiously or anything. I still don't. But, I can remember some of the paint schemes that went by. So it was like a blast from the past. Nostalgic a little bit.
For me, I'm actually old enough to remember when Rusty Wallace was actually driving the number 27 Kodiak Dippin' Tobacco car before Miller came on board. And I remember him going from 27 to switching to the 2 and switching through all the different 2 schemes to what you see now. So that was my hope, was that a legit throwback would win, something like that. I do have to say I am extremely disappointed in one team's paint scheme, and that was the 88 team. I know it was a one-race sponsor deal, but with as important as Darlington is, you would have thought they would have shifted that sponsorship to another race and let them do a throwback to something. Whether it be, the 24 was probably the best Hendrick Motorsports throwback because of the Rainbow Gordon car. I like how Richard Petty and the 43 team at the last minute threw that red on the car as like a last minute surprise.
Yeah.
But probably the one of the best schemes out there, and it just seems that American Ethanol's been such a great partner for Austin Dillon that they get to run these cool throwbacks. I'm just waiting to see if he does that rainbow throwback that Dale drove. That was probably one of those cool ones, and a lot of guys don't think about it, but Dale Earnhardt was probably one of those guys that instituted what we see in modern day of multiple sponsors, multiple cars. Now, one of the biggest things coming out of this weekend was that the 24 won best throwback because not every car had shown their throwback yet. who personally gets your nod for best paint scheme? And I think everybody, once we upload both last week and this week's shows, they'll understand the excitement both of us had in that VJ McLeod scheme.
It's a little, let's see, there were only a couple good camera shots of his car, but it's a little, what is it? I don't know, surreal. It's a little surreal to see your name plastered on a car. And I understand.
Well, I can agree with you on that because back in 2000, when on the original Xbox, when I popped in Formula F1 2001, the video game, and saw, at the time I knew none of the drivers except Juan Pablo Montoya, and I saw David Coulthard's car, and on the back of his car, when you're playing the game, you just see David. I thought was cool. So I can kind of feel with you for this, and we will upload both episodes at the same exact time. So once we upload both of them, everybody who has listened to episode 14 will know why we were excited about this. One, because I love the movie Days of Thunder just as much as Kyle Busch and Brian Davidson, who ran the old Cole Trickle Superflow scheme at Road America. I love seeing these old movie schemes on actual cars now. And I kind of miss the old Chevy Rock and Roll 400 at Richmond. The fall race used to be, all the Chevy cars would run Looney Tunes schemes. And you always knew who was going to run what. The 24 would run Bugs Bunny. The Goodwrench 3/2019, when Kevin Harvick inherited it, ran Taz. And then everybody else kind of fell in line. So I know you're going to say the 51's your favorite one. And as strange as it sounds, I've got to agree because it's from Days of Thunder, and I've been waiting on Kyle Busch to run that scheme. But it's going to have to take the right sponsor of his. If he was still sponsored by NOS Energy, which I think he may be, that would be the perfect scheme for him to run because it's the company colors. What about weakest throwback? Who do you think's got the weakest throwback?
Well, there were plenty of teams that didn't run one at all. So
we'll go with teams that did run throwbacks to have a weak one. Now I gotta give credit to the '66 team too, running that throwback scheme to Richard Petty's, or not Richard Petty, but Darrell Waltrip's retirement year.
God, I mean, every one of them is pretty good in its own right of the teams that ran them. I'm trying to think of who would be considered weak. What are you leaning towards?
I'm probably going to go with the 34 team and that throwback to Love's Truck Stop because it just, if I were running that car, hands down I would run a Wendell Scott throwback. Just because Wendell is one of those pioneers when you think about it. He was the guy who was the original driver of diversity. Him and Janet Guthrie, Patty Moyes, Shauna Robinson, those were the original drivers of diversity. And if you kind of think about it, Max Papis, Italian, Ron Fellows being Canadian, you have so many guys that were like pioneers before who may have not had a chance in today's racing like DJ Kennington has. And now, if we're handing out awards, which as the season starts slowing down, we are going to have, after the final race of NASCAR, NHRA, Formula One, and IndyCar, and ARCA, once they're all done, we're going to have the Not So Neutral Zone awards show. Symbolic, of course. There's not actually going to be actual trophies to present to every one of these drivers. And one of those awards is going to be like a Lifetime Achievement Award, and it's going to go to a driver who is retiring at the end of this year. And it's just something that I did on a website that I had, and I've lost the link to it, but I still have all the things from it, and I started it back in 2003 and done it every year. And strangely enough, the first person to get this award was Dale Earnhardt. Tony Stewart's gotten it. And of course, it was just something to have fun and post online. Of course, last year's was Dale Earnhardt Jr. If I would have done it, it would have been Dale Jr. I don't think I'm ever going to get to give.
Eventually, maybe.
Ironically, I did name one of the Funny Car awards after John Force. And, of course, you know, NHRA is the only active series that has regular females regularly competing besides the truck series with Jennifer Jo Cobb and with Danica Patrick gone. So, I don't do the most popular driver award. It's just like, who do we think had the best year of a champion? And right now, for the first time since 2000, in a while, the competition's tight for one thing. Driver with the most wins in their series, because you've got 3 guys in the Cup Series, you got guys in the Xfinity Series, you got guys over in NHRA, you've got Formula One, and it's just like everybody is staying winning. And of course, Formula One, it's the same guys always winning. Hamilton and Vettel, Hamilton and Vettel. And if you go to other series, not so much.
Yeah.
But what I was saying about one guy who I think has embodied the throwback Darlington schemes has got to be Jeffrey Earnhardt. Every year this guy runs a scheme to honor his grandpa. But none were better than when he ran the 32 car with Otter Pops on it, and it was blue and yellow like the old Dale Wrangler car. Now there's 2 interesting stories that's come out this week.
Okay.
First, I'm going to go with the one that came out today. Smaller announcement. Matt DiBenedetto, which is a tongue twister if you try to say it, who drives the 32 car, which is known to have the best throwbacks every year. I mean, they always are doing solid. And I got to go with the 00 this year, by the way, as a disappointing paint scheme, because the 32 team ran that scheme before, but they always run a good scheme. DiBenedetto said he won't be back with that team next year. Now, on the other side of that, we have the bigger problem. Not only is Jimmy Johnson a 7-time champion and a dominator in the Cup Series, losing lows at the end of the year, 5 Hour Energy announced they're not coming back. Bass Pro hasn't really confirmed or not, but they'll probably stay with him. Evidently, Auto Owners is not coming back, evidently. But the 78 team, after their most successful year in their career, is shutting down at the end of the year. And we actually talked through Facebook Messenger about this. Mm-hmm. Is it time to start preparing last rites for NASCAR like a lot of people believe? I don't think so, because I still think guys like Kyle Larson, who is a young guy, Chase Elliott, those guys are going to keep NASCAR interested. But, you know, what does it say about sponsorship if a guy like Truex can't nail down these sponsors? It just
can't even keep the team's doors open. I think NASCAR built up too much too quickly. Now the question is, can they contract? Historically, sports leagues, well, for right now, we will count NASCAR as a sports league, even though they're quite different. But sports leagues tend to expand as rapidly as they can, and then when they have to start contracting, everything falls apart. The only ones I can think of that, off the top of my head, that didn't would be like the CFL with their American expansion. Yeah, it died, but they didn't lose everything.
Well, you know, MLS, Major League Soccer, had this problem. A while back, they had no interest. They contracted major. Now they've re-expanded, and some of those teams that were lost during contraction are back, with the exception of teams like Chiva USA out in LA was an exception. A lot of them are not coming back, which is, you know, but I don't think we should wave the red flag. The big question is, I made a mistake before I go any further. I said red flag. I think I meant white flag. But, you know, you do kind of think red flag with NASCAR. So what's that, that fact check you got over there for us on that retraction? I was wrong. It was over 10 years. It was, did you say 2002, right?
2002 was when their resurgence really hit, when the United States unexpectedly made the quarterfinals in the FIFA World Cup. They, however, back it up just a little bit. earlier that very year is when they had decided to contract the Tampa Bay Mutiny and Miami Fusion. And then they got their break later in the year. So, and then, of course, when they started getting more international players, with Beckham especially, I remember Beckham fever. They were airing commercials all about with that. But to kind of tie it back in with the NASCAR, I think NASCAR is going to kind of have these difficult discussions about. I mean, and they already have a little bit shrinking the fields from 43 to 40.
It definitely helped. But at the same time, I think it hurt when it come to, as far as, entry fees may have went up. But at the same time, you almost have to look at it as like the, how they do the House of Representatives for Congress. The bigger state gets more people, the smaller gets less. And it's kind of like that with NASCAR a little. You don't see as much. But with these teams operating under affiliation and as satellite teams like Furniture Row with Joe Gibbs, I think Ganassi's with Hendrick now.
Wood Brothers with
Penske. So, and to an extent, all the four teams are kind of lumped together because they pretty much get all their engines from Roush Yates. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of, maybe, I mean, now Formula One's not a good example, even though they have a 2-team cap and they only run 11 teams. That's not a good model. But, IndyCar, they pretty much run like, I think, a 22 car field, except at Indy when they run 33 for the Indy 500. You don't want to see, maybe some of these underfunded teams like Go Fast Racing with losing Di Benedetto, or BJ McLeod, the team he ran for, the 51 team. Some of these teams that aren't Hendrick Motorsports, Roush, maybe if they gave them, because the charter system works for some teams, like Furniture Row Racing, the owner Barney Visser is not going to be hurting because he's going to be able to sell the team basically. Mm-hmm. For a value. Something Michael Waltrip got shafted on whenever his team shut down. But you almost have to, you almost feel bad. I mean, well, not almost, but you do feel bad for a guy like Truex. He was screwed over in that controversy at Richmond with Clint Boyer being the one who caused the problem, and Truex suffered as a result. To now, he's finally gotten some success. Now he's out of a ride. Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing is, Truex obviously is going to have Bass Pro. I could actually see a team like Jamie. I could actually see Jamie McMurray getting booted out of the 1 for Truex. I could see Ricky Stenhouse Jr. getting the boot out of the 17 for Truex. Or to an extent, Kurt Busch isn't guaranteed. I could actually see him, because Tony Stewart's had a long relationship with Bass Pro Shops. I could see him shifting over there too. And it's just so many possibilities. Plus, we don't know how many more years Jimmy Johnson's going to run. Kevin Harvick, Kurt Busch, these guys could at any time, especially a guy like Kurt. Kurt's been out there since 2001, like Harvick. He's got that big check he got at the Daytona 500. He's been a champion. And with Jimmy, there's only only one thing left for him to accomplish, and that's that 8th championship. But at the same time, when they first said Toyota was coming into Cup, Jack Roush said that was going to drive the cost up. It didn't really do that. The only thing that, to me, really drove price in NASCAR up is when he went and sold half his team to the Fenway Sports Group. So everybody else had to start partnering up with somebody just so they could save their company. And certainly one of the teams that you can kind of chalk up as a success story is Stewart-Haas Racing started out as Haas CNC, a satellite team off of Hendrick Motorsports so many years ago, to a rotating group of drivers in 2 cars, to Tony Stewart and Ryan Newman, who turned that company around. And then with the addition of Harvick, then Danica Patrick, Kurt Busch, now Eric Almirola and Clint Bowyer, they went from being a team that relied on somebody else to now they're pretty much like the class of the field with the Fords. They're right up there with Penske as a competitor. And I think that whole, what was one of the problems with NASCAR was when the automakers, Ford, Chevy, and Dodge had all those problems and had to be bailed out. That's what hurt, because when Dodge left, it kind of just said, well, Chevy and Toyota's going to dominate and Ford's are going to get lost by the wayside. Stewart-Haas Racing jumps over to Ford. Now Ford and Penske are dominating where Jack Roush used to be the dominant one, even though he didn't win that many championships. Not to mention Brad Keselowski got Dodge its lone championship in that return. That I think they'll be fine because, I mean, you got companies on Cup cars that, you know, if you'd have said 10 years ago they would be out there, you think it's crazy. I mean, look at Kingsford, Scott's Paper Towel, Bush's Baked Beans. They're sponsoring 2 cars and they're fine. That team's fine with 2 good drivers that would work. It's just, and the other guy is Elliott Sadler's leaving at the end of the year. After almost 20 years since 99 when he ran against Tony Stewart for Rookie of the Year in Cup. Definitely one of those forgotten things that everybody forgets about is Elliott Sadler. He's having some good years here, but I think he's kind of understood, you know, now's my time. I'm going to bow out now. And that's going to change the Xfinity Series next year.
Well, I'm not super familiar with the financials of NASCAR or the team financials, but I think, and this is something we've said before about this kind of push to get young drivers in the car. This is just a thought, and it may be far off from reality, but I think one of these pushes, one of the factors behind this push for younger drivers is maybe to keep costs down. You know, a young guy going into Cup is going to cost a lot less than an established guy, a known quantity. So I think that's one way that they're trying to keep costs down. I don't know if there's any one silver bullet that's going to, for now, let's just call it a impending tough time for NASCAR. I think with some changes, maybe some new leadership, they can restructure and get back to that popularity. Because what was it, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, NASCAR was the hot sport. And now it's kind of, I can remember where every race was on the major networks instead of on cable networks.
One of the biggest things that I think hurt them is how much the sanctioning body wants for somebody to sponsor the Cup Series. They went through over 30 years with RJ Reynolds sponsoring. Then they had right at, let's see, last year was the first year for Monster Energy, so they went through about 10 plus years of another sponsor. I think what hurts NASCAR, and they need to drop the garbage, is after Winston left, when at the time it was Nextel, when they took over and NASCAR started this stupid exclusivity deal where Sprint was a sponsor, no other phone provider could be on a car. And now with Monster Energy, you can't put another energy drink sponsor, which that was the problem with 5 Hour Energy, which is an energy shot, not a drink. If they would drop that mess, they could probably entice more sponsors, because nobody's going to want to come in when Monster Energy's negotiating for not a 5-year deal. They're only doing like 2-year deal and then a 2-year deal. If they're only going to be around 2 years, drop that exclusive deal so that other sponsors can come in, because you're hurting your business. Like if with Xfinity, if DirecTV wanted to sponsor a car in that series, they can't. They got to go to Cup or Truck. They either got to spend more money than they want, or they can take that less option with less television coverage. That to me is one of the things that hurt. I remember at one time, whenever they lifted that, NASCAR lifted that ban on spirits, not Ghost for anybody that's confused. But we're talking like when Jim Beam sponsored Robbie Gordon, Jack Daniels was on the conveniently sponsored 07, or Crown Royal. When those guys were in there, it just gave a new wave of sponsors. As unpopular as this may be with somebody, let tobacco companies back out there, not just the smokeless tobacco. There's a lot of money there that this company's not spending on advertisement, or you're going to have to come in and basically, you don't want to have to do it, but to an extent, do you put a fixed rate, kind of almost like what the NFL does on the rookie pay scale? Do you do that? If you've got 5 years experience, this is the max you can make on a contract, regardless of sponsorship. And basically, if you think about it, the sponsors are almost like an endorsement deal. And nowadays, like with Martin's brother, Ryan Truex, he got his Xfinity ride because he had that sponsor. Unfortunately, for the previous driver who got booted out of the ride, he brought a sponsor. So, sorry, he's got a sponsor, you don't, you're gone. And to an extent, some sponsors are not willing to put that money behind somebody that's been out there 20 years. I mean, you're going to have sponsors that are saying, this is my guy, this is how much I'm going to pay you. I'm not going to pay you more for 2 drivers when I can pay you for that one kid and save me that money.
And I would like to build off that point with, so like Jimmy Johnson and Lowe's, there's not going to be a whole lot of teams out there, a whole lot of companies out there that will want to sponsor him and try to make him their spokesperson, so to speak, because of his connection with Lowe's over the years. You see the 48 car, if it's something other than Lowe's on it, it kind of gets, wait, that's not right. So that kind of connection's been drawn. He's kind of, and I understand that they've sponsored him for a lot of years, but that's kind of put him in a hole there. He can't just go, well, I'm going to be the spokesperson and they're going to sponsor me for this company, because they're not going to pay as much. They haven't built that relationship. Another point I want to address when you're talking about tobacco, this is it's controversial, but controversy sells. Think about it. A lot of people tune in not because they're diehard race fans. What do you think people want to tune in for? They want the action. And sometimes the little controversy kind of is the action. So if you have a car riding around there, like we've got some states that have recreational marijuana, what happens when you have a dispensary wanting to sponsor a car? Are you going to let that on there? You think people will tune in to see what the controversy's about? I think they will.
Going back to what you said about the Jimmy Johnson thing about the sponsor,
mm-hmm.
that did happen a few years back with RCR.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the driver that it happened to. Clint Boyer, maybe? No. It was Casey Mears, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
When Casey Mears left, was it Casey?
Hendrick?
I believe it was when Casey Mears left Hendrick. I want to say he went to RCR. Cheerios did not want Casey Mears in the 33 Cheerios car because he was sponsored by Kellogg's, or he was associated with Kellogg's, so they didn't want him in the car. So instead, they moved him to the 07 and moved Clint to the 33 so that sponsor didn't have that thing. They did have a similar situation with Kurt Busch over at Penske when they signed Brad Keselowski. They put Brad in 2 and moved Kurt over to 22. That lasted briefly, and Kurt moved on to another team.
So on and so forth, yeah.
But a lot of times, a lot of companies do that, and that's also the reason that Petty Motorsports wasn't able to keep Eric Almirola, because Smithfield wanted him in the 43, and Petty had already said they wanted Bubba Wallace in the car. So Smithfield said, we're leaving, and through a horribly kept attempt at a secret with Smithfield, They went to the 10 team, and Danica Patrick basically got booted out for Almirola because that's who they wanted. That was their driver. He's had a little bit better of a career there so far than he did at Petty. Because to me, you can't really gauge somebody having a good career when their solo win is at a restrictor plate. You got to get a win elsewhere for people to kind of say, oh, he's not a... Well, kind of like Allmendinger. He is still considered a one-trick pony because his only win was road course. Kind of like if you look at guys like Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch. There's, as far as I know, there's only, I think, 1 or 2 tracks Kyle hasn't won at. And with his win this past weekend, Darlington, Brad Keselowski's now won at almost every track in the top 3 series, except for one, and I can't remember which one they mentioned it. So, to an extent, like Chase Elliott, he's going to have to get another win so everybody gets off his back about it. Mm-hmm. And another big thing is, besides Martin Truex losing his sponsor and it being Elliott Sadler's last year, another alum of the Everham Motorsports, Rich Petty Motorsports, Gillette team kind of thing is Casey Kane is ending his year at the end of the year full time. But a breaking story was he's not racing this weekend from still lingering results because his doctor doesn't want him to race from heat because of heat exhaustion at Darlington. And instead, what has become the guy that's become known as one of the greatest fill-in guys, who was also the guy who got Furniture Row Racing's first Cup win for him, filled in for Tony Stewart and several other drivers. My mind just went blank. Regan Smith is going to jump in that 95 car.
Oh, I hadn't heard that yet.
Yeah, that was just a few days ago. The guy who was program head for Rowan Cabarrus' motorsports program since its inception until his death. His daughter actually works for Lionel Racing, the diecast company. She's on their Facebook videos just to plug them a little. I like those guys. She actually does their little preview of their diecast cars. If you watched Victory Lap after the race, her husband was standing right behind Dale Jarrett and Kyle Petty while they were talking at the post-get race. And it was funny. I saw him. I reached and grabbed my phone, sent him a Facebook message, and I said, dude, you got to wave at me if that's really you. All of a sudden, a few seconds later, it had to have been at least like 2 minutes because of a delay. I just see a hand wave at me, and I was like, yes, that's you. But, and what was cool is the uniform he was wearing, the race shirt and race pants, is actually the one her dad wore when he was crew chief for Michael Waltrip when he drove the number 30 country time car for Bahari Racing, which is where he was originally Kyle Petty's sign guy, the guy that stood in front of the car and hoped he stopped before he moved over to a crew chief, and was he was the first crew chief in NASCAR to use a laptop computer and he told in class one time, everybody wondered, why has that guy got a computer and why are we out there running so quick laps? And because everybody caught on so quick, we weren't able to dominate because they figured us out.
Yeah.
And what's cool is Kyle Petty was the best man at his wedding. And at his memorial service, Michael Waltrip and Kyle Petty were there. I didn't go to meet them. I went because a guy I looked up to, even though I'd only known him for a few months. It was his memorial service, but I went there just, for support. And it was crazy because when I walked up to his daughter, she said, Kyle and Michael just left maybe 20 minutes ago. I had left straight from work and went straight there. And it was at Hendrick Motorsports in their press conference room is where they did the memorial service. And it was just cool that Hendrick Motorsports, even though he wasn't affiliated with them during his race career as a crew chief, and if you go back to, I think it's the early 90s, through the Max race card sets, you'll find one of him with those late 1980 sunglasses on, headphones, the headset on his head, sitting on the pit box, which is pretty cool. And I actually looked it up on Amazon. I have it on my wish list to get just for that one card. But, you know, that's what you kind of look at in racing. You don't, like you were saying, some people support the sponsors. Mm-hmm. To me, one of the best marketing deals that anybody ever done is when the team that's currently in limbo, BK Racing, which fields the 23, 83, and 93 teams, when they landed Dr. Pepper as a sponsor and turned the car's number to 23, was one of those things, and that's what you look at. Sponsor putting a number to the brand. And going with racing numbers, Casey Kane started out his Cup career in the 9 car. The next car he drove was the 4 car for 1 year with Red Bull. 9 minus 4 equals
5,
which is where the car number he drove at Hendrick Motorsports. When he left Hendrick Motorsports to drive for, conveniently, Levine Racing, car number is 95, his main 2 cars he spent most of his Cup career in. And sometimes you look at stuff like that and don't even think. Could you imagine going full circle on your Cup career? And like I mentioned earlier, Truex bumped McMurray out of the ride. The 1 car is where Truex started his Cup career at. So, you know, you kind of go... You kind of look at these guys going full circle to an extent.
There is, before we move on to anything else, I want to pose this hypothetical question. Well, not even hypothetical question. That does the driver make the sponsor, or does the sponsor make the driver? I think previously the driver made the sponsor, where the driver went out there, if he proved his worth, he could get sponsorship and he would be set for a while. Where I think as more of now, kind of the sponsorship, if the sponsorship comes together for a driver, he can have success.
Well, you know, Jimmy Johnson, his whole career, all he's ever had is Lowe's on the car. He's had Jimmy Johnson Foundation, of course, or Cobalt.
One-off people and
but
stuff like that.
Those are still connected to Lowe's to an extent because that was him. What you kind of look at is you got, like, to me, right now, I have a big problem seeing Matt Kenseth drive that 6 car because I'm so used to, I'm still tied him to the 17, not to 20, because I consider the 20 car to be Matt Kenseth's dark years. And to an extent, if you look at pressure for drivers, I don't think anybody out there has more pressure on them to perform in a car than Austin Dillon, because you're driving a car that everybody views that number as Dale Earnhardt's number because he was iconic to it. Same problem with Chase Elliott when he drove the 24 and now the 9, and William Byron in the 24. These guys are tied to that. And to imagine the pressure every driver since 1993 has faced driving that 43 car. The pressure Austin Dillon has driving that 3 car. I mean, you can go through the field. The 2 car, that was Rusty Wallace's car. So everybody knows that iconicness. And so, you know, you have all these guys looking at pressure, and with the sponsor and driver thing, it's no doubt that the sponsor is what made or what gave Kevin Harvick that opportunity. Or Budweiser was the sponsor that made Dale Jr. Dale Earnhardt made Goodwrench what it was. And obviously one of the oldest relationships in NASCAR is either, well, obviously Richard Petty and STP is probably the most iconic partnership in racing. Interstate Batteries with Gibbs. Trying to think of somebody else that may stick out to sponsor. I mean, even to an extent, Target with Ganassi, which was across 3 series. And now you have Caterpillar with Richard Childress, and they've been there since Bill Davis folded his team. And Jacob forgot to mention a few minutes ago, rabbit hole alert for me when I went. It was completely out down that rabbit hole.
It's all right.
But yeah, to an extent, yeah, some drivers do make the sponsor. I mean, Matt Crafton has ran Menards almost his whole truck career, except when he briefly ran for Kevin Harvick's team and had Goodwrench. Um, Obviously, you can't say that about Paul Menard and Menards because now he's running a car that doesn't have Menards on it except a few races.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of do look at, yeah, some sponsors do make the drivers because you still have that connection. Like, if you say NASCAR and McDonald's, only two drivers come to mind: Bill Elliott and Jimmy Spencer. I don't think Jamie McMurray when I think McDonald's, just because Bill Elliott had that iconic car that Jamie did a throwback to, the Mac Tonight Blue car. Jeff Gordon, he made DuPont, which is now Axalta, what it is. Because without his success, everybody would have just said, what's this guy running a rainbow car for? What's wrong with him? Why's he got a rainbow on his car?
A lot of people actually learned what DuPont was which was the purpose of the sponsorship. Not everybody knew who they were.
Yeah,
so I think that's maybe that is one of the biggest change with sponsorships nowadays is there's so many different ways to get in front of people, especially with the internet and stuff like that. But maybe, pre-online, to get your company out in front of people, they turn on the race and there you are.
I did think of two other drivers who did make their sponsors big.
Who?
They're not NASCAR guys.
Well, that's fine.
They're NHRA guys. Go with two guys who each have more championships than Dale Earnhardt, Jimmy Johnson, Richard Petty. Go with the 8-time Top Fuel champion, Tony Schumacher. He has put Army on the map. And, when NASCAR done away with the sponsorships because of Congress, Tony Schumacher kept his because he is such a key to the Army. The other guy being the guy that put a 20-plus some year career with Castrol and put them on the map. Now he's doing the same with Peak. John Force. You look at that. John Force ran most of his career with Castrol, then he got Peak. Tony Schumacher with Army. Richard Petty, STP. Dale Earnhardt, Goodwrench. Jimmy Johnson, Lowe's. That's the thing a lot of these sponsors, I think, are missing out on.
Yeah, with all this jumping around, then you've got sponsors running a couple races or cars that are basically... I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it kind of lacks that spokesperson, driver, company bond there.
The other one, and this was to them bowing out of NASCAR. Joey Logano was not the spokesperson for him. Matt Kenseth could not sell supplies for him. But Tony Stewart and Home Depot, when he left that team and Home Depot didn't go with him, that's what killed their sponsorship in NASCAR because Joey Logano was not the right guy. I don't look at an 18-year-old kid and think he's going to want to build a house. He's going to want a home improvement. Matt Kenseth, I don't look at him because that was one of those things about, competing sponsors because he was, for the longest time, DeWalt Tools. Mm-hmm. I don't look at him and think Home Depot. I think Tony Stewart when I see Home Depot. Kind of to the extent that, even though Carl Edwards was Office Depot, Tony Stewart I link with Office Depot because he was more successful with them. And not necessarily is every guy successful. I mean, I don't know how long Federated Auto Parts has been with Ken Schrader. And what did he do last year with them? He won an ARCA championship as an owner with a driver that nobody wanted to give a ride to in one of the top 3 series with Austin Terrio. And he wins the ARCA championship. But you kind of link certain guys to certain sponsors. Like, we may have to do this on the next episode, just kind of me come up with a list of sponsors and see if not everybody listening, but Jacob, kind of quiz Jacob, because I know I can pass this quiz if he were to try to do it. But come up with a list of sponsors like, okay, we probably got about maybe little around 15 minutes before the music starts. I'm going to give you 5 sponsors, NASCAR sponsors, and see if you can name a driver and see if you can link a sponsor. They may not be a sponsor now, but I'll just randomly grab one
Oh,
out.
let's see if we can do this.
Okay, number 1, Hardee's.
Hardee's. I'll be honest, I don't know.
Kill Yarborough.
Kel Yarborough. Remember, I only watched racing since like the turn of the century.
Okay, another one. Let's see. I'm trying to dig for these.
Dig for him.
I'm struggling here on this.
Yeah, because they're either painfully obvious or you're kind of digging deep to obscurity. I think that kind of actually highlights our point here, that you kind of associate drivers with certain sponsors.
This one should be easy.
Okay.
If I say Napa Auto Parts,
Napa Auto
Chase
Parts.
Elliott is not the obvious answer. He's not the first person I think of.
No, because it's Michael Waltrip. You know?
To an extent, you know who the first person is I think of?
Who?
Ron Hornaday Jr., who won the truck championship with them as a sponsor.
Napa. Yeah, you know what? I do know. I do know that
He
truck.
was a good one. Pick another one out here. You should get this one, because this is obvious. Citgo gas stations.
Citgo Gas. Oh, I know this one, but my mind's drawing a blank on the driver.
To give you a clue, think Matt DiBenedetto's Darlington car.
I know the car. I can see it, but I cannot think of the name, and I'm going to hit myself when I hear it.
He's a NASCAR analyst now. Burton. Jeff Burton.
Yep. I'm going to hit myself now.
One of those iconic guys. Try you a little easier one here.
I knew that one. I just could not draw the name, and I saw his face in my mind's eye, and was like, couldn't.
Okay, I'm going to dig for an old school sponsor that's not relevant in any medium anymore.
Oh, God.
This one's easy. It's
Okay.
very easy.
Okay.
Alltel.
Alltel. That was, wasn't that Newman?
Yes.
That was Newman.
That's when he
That's
earned...
funny because I don't even... Alltel is a name I have not heard in forever.
Because they were bought by Verizon.
Because they were bought by Verizon.
Ironically, this is not a Verizon Alltel plug, but when I first got my first contract phone, they were Alltel, and a few months later they switched to Verizon.
And that's the thing. That was just a bond there. Alltel, I was like, Alltel, what the hell were they even? But I knew it was Newman.
Okay, this one's going to be a good one. And I know most people are going to say Kyle Busch when I say this one. Interstate Batteries.
Well, you know I'm going to get that one. That was Bobby Labonte.
Obviously. Now, that's what 4?
Uh-huh.
Number 5. Number 5 is a key. And if you don't get this one,
Uh-huh.
I don't care if you became a NASCAR fan last week.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knows this one.
Uh-huh.
Texaco Haviland.
Texaco Avalon. Oh, with the black car and what's his name?
This is easy.
It was that black car.
We lost him 25 years ago. Helicopter crash.
I know the person.
Kyle Larson paid tribute to him.
Oh, you're just making it worse.
Think my first name. Alabama Gang.
I'm going through so many last names and none of them fit.
His dad was a Cup champion with Miller Lite. He drove for Robert Yates Racing in the 28 Haviland Texaco Ford Thunderbird.
Oh, God.
You ready to kick yourself? Davey Allison.
Allison. Oh, my God. I kept going through names.
Okay, with about 9 minutes,
Uh-huh.
we'll do 3 for you to give me. That way and then we'll try to, by our next show, which after we get done recording, we'll come up with when our next show is going to be. We both are going to challenge each other to 15 sponsors each. And for you, I will make all my sponsors $19.99 and current. Yours can be from... I'm gonna go with mine. You can go all the way back to 1985.
1985.
Because for me, one of my most iconics is Folgers Mark Martin. Maxwell House, Sterling Marlin. So, it's, you kind of, like, I kind of look back and I actually remember Tonka Trucks sponsored a car.
Really?
Kenny Irwin Jr., he took over the 28 car for a while, moved over to Ganassi driving the 42 car, and that was the same year that both he and Kyle Petty's son Adam died, like 3 months apart at New Hampshire in separate wrecks. Ganassi turned the 42 car into the 01. That's when he got Singular Wireless as a sponsor.
That was the first cell phone company I had. That's a name I hadn't heard in a long time. They were purchased by AT&T.
So was Joe Nemechek's sponsor. You may not remember this, but Meineke had sponsored Joe Nemechek and Jimmy Spencer at one time.
I gotta see if I got my old die-cast cars, because I got a bunch of them.
I have a box right there that's full of old school cars.
We had a bunch of them. Tore them up because we actually played with them.
Now, if you want to cheat,
Uh-huh.
go to, and this is an unendorsed plug here. Go to Jayski, JAYSKI.com. You can too. Go to their paint scheme link and team chart, and they go all the way back to, I think, the early 2000s. And, I mean, there's a lot of them, like Square D.
Square D. I remember that. I have that die-cast car. That was Hamilton, wasn't it?
The late Bobby Hamilton.
Bobby Hamilton. Now, watch. I got that one.
Now, ironically enough, when I mentioned the Chevy Rock and Roll race with the Looney Tunes throwbacks on one of our episodes, one year he was injured or sick and couldn't race that race. They got Greg Biffle to fill in, and he drove the black and red Square D Marvin the Martian car. Like a lot of people, if you say Pennzoil, they're going to say Joey Logano. For me, I got to say the same thing that Joey Logano said whenever they asked him about his throwback for Darlingtonshire. Steve Park. He even put Steve Park's name on the driver door instead of his own, because he said that was Steve's guy. He wanted to pay tribute to a New Englander. And, I like whenever guys do throwbacks to other people. Unlike that driver who drives the purple car for Joe Gibbs Racing. I love those throwbacks, like Ernie Irvan. Another one you can think about, Kodak. When I think Kodak, I think Sterling Marlin and them Daytona 500 races with him in that car. That's what you do. You kind of think of who? Kind of like Skull, the Skull Bandit car. You think Harry Gant, Rick Mast, Dick Trickle with the Heilig Myers car. It's kind of, for me, I like to go old school when I think of these drivers. Just like this right here in my hand, J.D. McDuffie drove with one of these in his mouth every race. They would, over the radio, you'd hear, "Oh God, we're going to have to take some turn out of the car. It's a little too hard going through this corner, not that corner." Most crew chiefs would have been like, "What the hell is he saying?" That's JD. Yeah. Sadly, JD passed away in a wreck at the track. And, if you look at it, Richard Petty was one of those guys. Him and the Wood Brothers car were at a time when sponsorship was new. Or kind of like Snake and Mongoose with the Hot Wheels sponsorship in NHRA. They were at a time when sponsorship wasn't big. A crazy one is, if you said Marlboro, what driver do you think of when you hear Marlboro? I think of Michael Schumacher in Formula One with Ferrari having that sponsor. When they said you can't put cigarettes on the Formula One cars, what did Ferrari do to sneak around that rule? They put a big old barcode across the back fin of the car, which everybody knew that was a symbol for Marlboro. Here's a stretch for you. If I say Camel cigarettes,
that's a stretch.
Jimmy Spencer drove the number 23 Joe Camel purple yellow car. There's certain guys, like, you sit there, like we've been saying for most of this episode, which next week is going to be devoted to racing and sponsorship and which one of us has the better deal. Not sure if we're going to be, we're not sure yet about next week in an episode, but the following week we may do one on Saturday. If not, it'll be about 3 weeks before we do another. So if you don't catch up on the episodes, and we talked before the show, this will be a little closing comment here. We have changed our mind from episode 14 to this episode about doing the weekly picks, and we're gonna just highlight that week. And I think we're gonna, instead of game of the week, we'll go with what's going to be, because, NFL does what game do they think is going to be the most exciting for flex. We're going to disagree with them, and we're going to pick our game. And for those of you lucky enough to listen, because I don't think this is going to be a good year for a couple of us.
The best story is the one guy that's the huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan that used his keeper on Le'Veon Bell and now does not have him for season opener and looks really dumb. Don't really have a whole lot of other good stories. Some unusual drafting. Got one owner that was really happy about Jay Ajayi's night Thursday night.
First week out of the way, we will keep up with the plan, but we're going to strip it down to the two of us coming up with who we think are the 5. We'll go with the 6 best teams in the NFL, not necessarily. And to be fair, I think we'll do 3 on each conference instead of saying,
top 3 each conference. I think that would be easier to come up with.
Because if you look at it right now, if we did top 6, I would definitely say at least 5 of them are from the NFC.
Yeah, it's hard to balance anything out yet until you really see the teams play.
Until we get to the post-Tom Brady era, there's going to be no way to guarantee a balanced AFC.
Well, I mean, it might just swing back the other way where the AFC was, crap. And the NFC kept winning Super Bowls. Poor Buffalo. They were right smack dab in that era.
I would love to have... I wish I had the closing song just for this week. Be the song either The Bandit or Eastbound and Down to give Bert a send-off. Kind of like I wish I would have had the Vader's pro wrestling theme song. It's Vader time for his send-off.
We just sing it. No.
Yeah, they don't want us. They don't want to hear us sing. Plus, that's bad for both of us. I don't think anybody wants to hear either one of us sing. Like in that one country song, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket with a lid on it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Not So Neutral Zone. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter.
Our new Instagram at NSNZ51 Podcast is our number on there.
Alright. And we'll set on the Facebook page. YouTube. I don't know.
That's it.
Telegram.
Telephone.
See you next week.